Well, most of you, I'm wagering, as I did not, have probably never heard of the Battelle Memorial Institute. Well, simply put, it is the backbone of the United States science strategy. Battelle manages 9 major science and technology research centers, from Los Alamos to Lawrence Livermore to the Oak Ridge National Lab and more. Battelle's portfolio includes nuclear science, energy, national security, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Today, Lou Von Thaer is the CEO of Battelle. He will introduce John Wagner and Tom Mason. They run 2 of Battelle's 8 science technology centers, and they're here to take you behind the scenes of the places where the future is taking shape today. Please welcome Lou, John, and Tom. Welcome, have fun. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Tyler. Quickly, we have a quick video and then we'll hop in. Well, good afternoon. So most of you probably haven't heard of Battelle, but we've been around for 96 years. We were part of the Manhattan Project. We'd help with the fuel for the first nuclear submarine. We built the first copy machine. We sold it to a little company that, because of the technology, changed their name to Xerox. If you go to where we are today, we're involved with developing new ways to deliver cancer medicines that can go directly to a part of the body instead of through the entire body. We've developed a technology that can actually destroy these PFAS and PFOS forever chemicals that we're all hearing about. And we spun a company out last year to start putting them into the market, and it's starting to clean up and destroy those chemicals today. But what we're probably most proud of is the work we do for our national laboratories, particularly our Department of Energy laboratories. These are treasures of the country. They are something we need to protect and take care of. And today we have 2 of our lab directors here, Tom Mason, who runs Los Alamos National Laboratory, and Tom's going to talk about one of these topics you're hearing a lot about today, artificial intelligence, and how we use it at the laboratories to advance our science and research. And then, of course, you have to power all these generative AI research centers, and you need this massive amount of new power. So John Wagner, who runs our Idaho National Laboratory, is one of our nation's nuclear experts, and we'll tell you a little bit about how that technology is coming along. Tom.
Okay, thank you, Lou. Okay, this is not advancing, doesn't really matter. So I was going to talk a little bit about AI. You've heard a lot about it in the last talk. It's come up a number of times. But I wanted to really talk about AI for science, because in the end, I think that actually may be the way that we really see the big impact. You know, any new technology goes through a kind of cycle where there's a lot of enthusiasm. That enthusiasm generates a lot of investments. In some sense, the enthusiasm may be a little bit overblown, but that's necessary to generate the investments at the scale you need to enact a transformation. At the end of that, there may be some sort of, dot-com-like collapse, but the world is different. And that's how we do things in this country, whether it's railroads or the dot-com boom. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the enthusiasm about AI we will probably find doesn't quite pan out in terms of economic models, but I'm also quite confident that the world is going to be different at the end. And I think it's largely because of the possibility for artificial intelligence to accelerate the rate of progress. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about why we're all talking about AI right now, it's because of these large language models which sort of burst onto the scene 2 years ago or so. But it's really not a new thing. In the research area, we've been doing various forms of artificial intelligence for quite some time, sometimes using different names for it, machine learning, big data, and have been getting pretty excited about the potential. And the large language models burst onto the scene because you saw the convergence of a couple different trends. One was the scale of data that was available by basically scraping the whole internet. The second was the computational power that was embodied in GPUs, as you know, sold by NVIDIA primarily. The third piece was the algorithms that underpin the sort of thing we do, neural networks, transformer technology. And it happened that most of those algorithms had been around for quite some time. People like Jeff Hinton and others had been working on them with actually kind of uninspiring results. And it was only when the scale of data on the scale of the internet and the machines large enough to crunch it sort of coincided about 4 years ago or so, that you started to see results that were interesting and qualitatively different in the form of these large language models, which are basically predictive models of what words should come next given the following input stream. And that has generated, obviously, a huge amount of excitement and a huge amount of investment based on the promise that there's going to be significant productivity gains in the form of automating of routine tasks. And certainly, if you think about the ability to have an agent who's going to summarize all your emails or help you write a report, that's kind of interesting, but I would argue that it's not really particularly transformational. And you know, the prior examples that you can point to are in the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of discussion in economic circles about something called the productivity paradox. And the productivity paradox was in the 70s and 80s, companies were investing a lot in computing technology, information technology. Of course, you had the development of the personal computer, the PC, at the beginning of the 80s. And economists were not seeing any gain in productivity. And this was counter to the sort of economic theory that would say, well, when you introduce a new technology, like the steam engine, or the internal combustion engine, or electricity, you should see productivity gains. And that was essentially the model for the Industrial Revolution. But in the 70s and 80s, companies were investing a large amount in computing technology, and the real economic growth was actually quite stagnant. There were no real productivity gains, and this was something of a mystery. It was hotly debated, and as I said, it was called the productivity paradox. In the 90s, you actually did see some technology-based productivity gains for most of the decade of the 90s, but at the end, with the dot-com crash, that ended, and for the last 20 years, again, we've been in a period where there's been relatively little in the way of productivity gains, despite the fact that we've seen pretty revolutionary technology in the form of things like the smartphones we have and the use of the internet and so forth. So this mystery of the productivity paradox, there's differing views on why it was that we observed this. I think the general consensus now is that the first productivity paradox in the 70s and 80s was essentially a time lag where we started to see the productivity gains in the 90s only because initially when the new technologies was introduced, people just kept doing the same stuff. They didn't change the way the businesses work. So maybe you could use word processors to produce longer documents, but it didn't really add much more economic value. So there was a period of time where we didn't really cash in on the productivity gains. And the best explanation I've seen for why we haven't seen much productivity gains in the last 20 years, despite the introduction of relatively revolutionary changes, is because Yes, we got all these smart devices and we can communicate. It allows us to do our job faster, and we waste all the time staring at our cell phones. And so the productivity gain is kind of a net thing. It allows you to do things faster, but if you don't use it to do things faster that are economically productive, you don't get much benefit. And I think a lot of the large language models that we're seeing, there's a great risk that that's going to happen. I'm going to automate routine tasks, but if I use AI to write a much longer report than I would have written before, which nobody reads, but they use AI to summarize it into a paragraph, there's no gain in productivity from that round, from that cycle. So the productivity gains of AI are going to be the net. How much of it do we squander, and how much do we actually cash in terms of more productive activity? It's not to discount it. I mean, I run a big bureaucracy. So if I get a 10% productivity gain, that's great, I'll take it. But my guess is that 10% productivity gain is going to be a 40% improvement in how fast I can do things, and a 30% loss in terms of doing things that are useless or not valuable, or wasting time with more diversions. So that's not what I'm really excited about. What we're really excited about at Los Alamos is using productivity gains for science. So we bought this new machine called Venato. We made a deal about 4 years ago with NVIDIA to get it. It's a good thing we did, because we couldn't afford it now. And it's not on the scale of the hyperscalers that you heard about, but it's large enough to do a 1 billion parameter model on a scientific problem. And one example of this is predicting material fractures. So fracture is something that in a particular material and a certain set of parameters we understand pretty well right now. We can study it and measure it and we can model it. But there's not a good generalized description of how fracture works. And developing a new material is a 40-year exercise typically. And these are high consequence applications we're talking about. In case you don't know, Los Alamos makes nuclear weapons. So we would like to speed that up. And that's the sort of thing that large language models, where the language is not English, French, German, or Chinese, the language is material science, biology, or chemistry, has the opportunity to increase the pace of human progress. And the reason I think that's transformational, and the reason I think those productivity gains won't be squandered, is because science is a big feedback machine. Innovations in one area accelerate innovations in another. So we developed accelerators to do physics and use them to study the molecules that are important for curing disease. We develop understanding of how semiconductors work and use them to make computers that we can model plastics with. Science is a big feedback loop, and so I think the gains that we see from applying large language models to understanding things like the behavior of materials are going to be pretty durable. They're going to have an impact on things like the design of nuclear reactors, which my colleague John is now going to talk about.
Great, thank you, Tom. Good afternoon. I'd like to talk to you about reimagining the nuclear energy solution. I would like to suggest that energy security, global competitiveness, economic prosperity, and climate considerations demand a dramatic and significant expansion of nuclear energy. And I would also like to suggest that we are on the cusp of just that. We're in what I would consider a preparatory phase. Now, some of you in the audience are probably thinking, I remember somebody saying like 10 or 15 years ago that this was going to happen. I remember somebody talking about something like a nuclear renaissance. It didn't happen. Why does this guy think it's going to happen now? Well, that's what I'd like to talk about. So when we think about what's going to happen in the future, it's obviously important. I think multiple speakers talked about what happened in the past that will inform our future. So if you go back in the United States and actually abroad, and you look at the history of nuclear energy, which is what this busy chart shows you, You can see that in the 70s and 80s, we had a dramatic expansion of nuclear energy in the United States. And then we essentially went to no new nuclear energy. The existing reactors continue to operate, providing nearly 20% of our electricity and about half of our non-carbon emitting electricity. But then we stopped. Now, why did we stop? There's a few different reasons. I don't have time to go into all of them. But I will say a couple things were cost overruns. So what was happening in the 80s? We had significant increase in interest rates. Large capital projects are very sensitive to that. We had increasing regulatory requirements in the nuclear field, which resulted in increased scope and cost of these projects. We also had flat, even declining energy demand growth, so we didn't need as much power. And we also had cheap natural gas, so we had cheaper alternatives. A lot of things were happening that led us to where we are. So in the last 3 decades, we have deployed almost no new nuclear in the United States, and actually we've shut down perfectly good reactors for economic reasons. All right, that doesn't sound too promising, does it? So what's happening now in this period that I call the preparatory phase for a dramatic nuclear expansion? Because of the attributes of nuclear, you're seeing a great deal of interest in it from multiple countries. Nuclear is not carbon emitting. Nuclear is firm baseload power, so not intermittent. If you want it for manufacturing or data centers, you want constant power. Nuclear has because of the energy density, very low land use. It also has the ability to be versatile in terms of supporting other needs like decarbonizing industrial processes, chemical processes, refineries, things like this. So 30 countries have come together in the last 2 years, just over the last 2 years, to pledge a dramatic increase in nuclear, a tripling of nuclear. For perspective, in the United States, we have about 100 gigawatts coming from 94 reactors. So to triple that, you can think about 200 new big reactors. That's a big, big goal for the United States and multiple other countries. There's some hope. In the last 2 years, the United States started and completed 2 brand new nuclear reactors in the state of Georgia, Vogtle Units 3 and 4. You see a picture of them here. Those 4 units in Georgia power approximately 2 million businesses and homes in that area. And they are operating quite well. We learned a lot of lessons. It wasn't easy. They were overrun in terms of cost and schedule, but we learned from that. Something else historic is occurring in the United States. We are actually working to restart reactors that were shut down. We've never done this before. This is historic. So the Palisades reactor in Michigan, an 800 megawatt plant that will power approximately 400,000 homes and businesses, was shut down in 2022 and will be restarted this year through some help from the federal government and some ambitious private sector dollars and investments. As soon as they do that, they will also work to build 2 new small modular reactors on that site. While we don't have a lot of agreement in Washington, D.C. by our different political parties, we do actually have agreement on the value of nuclear energy. We have bipartisan support. Multiple pieces of legislation, including the ADVANCE Act, which was signed off last year, have been passed to support the expansion of nuclear energy. And there was a lot of other pieces of legislation, funding and so forth, that our federal government, the 2 parties actually agree on and are working together. They also provided approximately $3 billion to restart domestic uranium capabilities in the United States, which we had let go off to other countries. And uranium is the fuel for nuclear reactors. Another example, historic. Some of you probably remember 3 Mile Island, but you probably remember it in a negative way. 3 Mile Island in 1979, one of those reactors had a core meltdown. Nobody died, nobody was harmed, but it made a lot of people look at the safety of nuclear energy. What a lot of people don't realize is there were actually 2 reactor units on that site, and 3 Mile Island Unit 1 continued to operate until 2019 when it was shut down for economic reasons. Last year, Microsoft, because of their data and other power needs, got together with the utility that owned that reactor, Constellation, and did a power purchase agreement to purchase all the power, 830 megawatts, from 3 Mile Island Unit 1 if they would restart it. So that is underway right now. Over the last 3 decades, many financial organizations have shied away from investing in nuclear for a variety of reasons, some of them I mentioned. Last year in New York City at Climate Week, 14 banks came together in a pledge of support, and we're seeing more and more financial institutions removing their impediments to investing in nuclear and investing in nuclear. Other countries around the globe, because of the attributes I mentioned, are either expanding nuclear, considering expanding nuclear, or actually taking the real steps to become a nuclear country like Poland. But just one example. A lot has been talked about today about hyperscale data centers and their power needs and so forth. This is driving a marriage between nuclear and these companies. Google entered into an agreement with an advanced reactor company called Kairos to deploy small modular reactors to support their needs. Amazon also entered an agreement with another advanced reactor company called X Energy for their power needs. 2 reactors that were being built in South Carolina, but the project was abandoned for a variety of reasons I don't have time to go into, are working to finish those 2 reactors there in South Carolina. Meta put out a request for proposal for 1 to 4 megawatts of nuclear power. Our new Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, on his first day issued a memo, and one of the key elements was unleashing commercial nuclear power in the United States. You can see his quote here: "The long-awaited American nuclear renaissance must launch during President Trump's administration." And this is all just talk. At Idaho National Laboratory and in other places, we are actively working to build new advanced reactors and demonstrate them again, working with private companies and federal agencies to de-risk these technologies so that utilities and other energy end users have confidence in particularly cost and schedule aspects of new nuclear. We have a lot of challenges remaining, most of them policy and financial related, but we're working toward it. So I want to kind of close with saying, I believe we will reimagine nuclear energy in this country. Other countries already are doing that, by the way, and starting to surpass us. And hopefully I answered some of those questions with you. I look forward to a bright nuclear energy future. Thank you.